Elias Ward moved to Brookhaven Ridge because he wanted peace. After years of living in cramped apartments surrounded by noise, chaotic neighbors, and honking traffic at all hours, he longed for space, a home where he could plant things, shape his own yard, and finally breathe. His new house sat on a gentle corner lot, with a front yard that soaked in the morning sun and a backyard perfect for a small garden. When he moved in, the yard was mostly bare, with only patchy grass and a few tired shrubs planted by the previous owner. Elias saw this emptiness not as a flaw, but as an opportunity. He envisioned a place filled with color lavender by the walkway, rose bushes near the porch, and perhaps a line of young maple trees along the fence to create privacy and give the neighborhood a more organic look. For weeks, he researched soil types, native plants, and designs that would not require excessive maintenance. Everything he planned was tasteful, modest, and environmentally friendly. And most importantly, everything seemed completely within the community's written guidelines. The HOA documents mentioned permissible landscaping, required maintenance, and rules against obstructive structures, but nothing forbidding trees or gardens. So Elias planted 6 small maples on the side of his yard, added a beautifully arranged flower bed near the walkway, and placed decorative stones along the border to match the neighborhood's calm aesthetic. Neighbors complimented him daily. One older couple even brought him homemade cookies to thank him for making the street look more alive. Elias felt proud. For the first time in years, he enjoyed coming home, sitting on his porch, and looking at something he had created with his own hands. But then came the envelope, a stark white letter taped to his door with the unmistakable HOA logo printed in bold blue at the top. Inside was a notice of violation, claiming his landscaping disrupted the uniform visual presence of the community. The wording was vague, almost comically so, and Elias initially assumed it was a mistake. He called the HOA office, expecting a simple correction, but instead reached a bored receptionist who read a prepared script about consistent neighborhood appearance standards. When Elias asked where in the CC&RS it prohibited trees or gardens, she transferred him to HOA President Harlan Pierce, a man known for strict enforcement and an affinity for rules, even ones that didn't actually exist. Harlan sounded irritated from the moment he picked up the phone. He insisted the trees must be removed, or at least covered, with mesh screening until the board reviewed their appropriateness. Covered? Trees? Elias was stunned. He politely refused, stating he had followed every written rule. But Harlan responded with a cold warning. Failure to comply will result in escalating daily fines. That night, Elias walked through his yard, flashlight in hand, slowly circling the maples he had planted. They were harmless, tiny, young, barely taller than his shoulders. Yet now they stood at the center of something he didn't understand, something that felt much bigger than simple landscaping. The situation escalated much faster than Elias anticipated. Within 3 days of his refusal, he received a second notice, this one labeled Final Warning. The HOA claimed his trees were non-compliant with community visual standards and demanded he remove them within 72 hours. Attached was a page detailing the looming financial penalties: $150 per day for non-removal of unapproved landscaping, plus administrative fees for every communication the HOA sent. Elias reread the document twice, unable to believe the sheer absurdity. He wasn't blocking sidewalks, installing a pool, or building a shed. He had simply planted trees. Out of frustration, he visited the HOA office in person, hoping to reason with someone face to face. The office was a cramped room filled with filing cabinets, outdated decor, and a faint smell of coffee. Behind the desk sat Harlan Pierce, a tall man with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the stiff posture of someone who believed rules were the highest form of justice. Harlan greeted Elias with the warmth of a frozen brick. "Your trees violate the uniform look," he said without hesitation, as if the phrase were sacred text. Elias calmly asked for the exact rule he had broken. Harlan avoided eye contact and instead pulled out a binder, filled with highlighted sections that didn't actually apply to Elias' case. When pressed further, he finally admitted, "The board recently discussed new visual standards. Your trees do not align with the direction our community is moving." Elias stared at him, stunned. "But those new standards are not in the CC and RS." Harlan responded with a shrug. "They will be soon." That answer revealed everything. The HOA was enforcing rules that didn't officially exist yet. Word spread quickly. Neighbors were confused and upset on Elias' behalf. Some had similar trees, others had garden beds even more elaborate than his, yet none had received violation letters. It became clear this wasn't about uniformity. This was targeted. Perhaps Harlan saw Elias as an easy target, a new resident unwilling to fight. Or perhaps Harlan simply disliked that Elias' yard drew more praise than his own. Regardless, Elias decided he would not be bullied. He documented everything. Every letter, every conversation, photographs of the neighborhood showing dozens of homes with landscaping far more complex than his. The more evidence he gathered, the more obvious the board's inconsistency became. Still, the threats continued. The HOA sent him a bill for $450 in pending fines, even though the appeal window wasn't even closed yet. When Elias tried to attend the next HOA meeting to speak publicly, Harlan attempted to block him, claiming the discussion list was already full. But Elias refused to back down. He recorded the entire interaction, including the moment Harlan finally caved under pressure from other homeowners. Elias left the meeting feeling shaken but determined. He realized he was stepping into a fight he didn't choose, but one he was no longer willing to walk away from at the board meeting. The atmosphere was tense enough to slice with a knife. Dozens of homeowners filled the small community hall, murmuring about recent HOA decisions and the increasingly aggressive enforcement of vague rules. The moment Elias stood to speak, the chatter died down. He presented photos of his trees, copies of the ambiguous violation notices, and most importantly, images showing multiple homes in the neighborhood with similar or even more elaborate landscaping. "If this is about uniformity," Elias said calmly, "then why am I the only one receiving fines?" His voice echoed through the hall, firm but respectful. Homeowners leaned forward, whispering to one another. Harlan sat rigid, visibly irritated, occasionally flipping through papers as if searching for a rule that didn't exist. One homeowner raised her hand. "I've had a garden for years. Why wasn't I fined?" Another chimed in. "My neighbor has 3 maple trees. Why isn't he in violation?" Nearly a dozen residents followed, questioning the inconsistency. Harlan struggled to answer, offering vague explanations about pending changes and aesthetic direction. But the crowd wasn't buying it. The pressure grew until Harlan abruptly ended the discussion, claiming the board needed to review all concerns privately. But as people filed out, something important happened. Several residents approached Elias, offering support and expressing frustration at the board's increasing overreach. A retired judge even handed Elias his card, whispering, "They're bluffing. They can't enforce rules retroactively." Over the next week, Elias' yard became a symbol of resistance. Neighbors stopped by to compliment the trees, ask for updates, and share their own frustrations. Some admitted they had been afraid to speak up, worried the board would target them too. Elias realized this wasn't just his fight. It was a battle against an HOA board that had grown too comfortable with unchecked power. Determined to push back legally, Elias consulted an HOA attorney. The lawyer reviewed the documents, shook his head, and immediately identified multiple violations by the board, enforcing unapproved standards, issuing inconsistent violations, and attempting retaliation. Armed with legal clarity, Elias drafted a formal dispute letter demanding the HOA retract the violations and suspend all fines until an official vote on landscaping standards occurred. When Harlan received the letter, he exploded figuratively. He accused Elias of trying to dismantle the community and threatened further consequences. That same week, Elias received 2 more violation letters, one claiming his trash bin was too visible. It wasn't. And another claiming his garden stones were improperly colored. It was obvious retaliation. But Elias didn't back down. He doubled down, filing a complaint with the state's HOA regulatory office. If the board wanted a battle, they were about to get one exact and by the book. The state complaint triggered an official investigation, something no HOA board ever wants to face. Inspectors requested documentation, meeting minutes, financial records, and any evidence supporting the board's enforcement decisions. Panic swept through Brookhaven Ridge's leadership like wildfire. Harlan and the board scrambled to justify their actions, but their inconsistencies quickly surfaced. They claimed Elias trees violated a pending uniformity protocol, a term that didn't exist in any official document. They produced meeting minutes that suspiciously lacked timestamps, signatures, or details. They even attempted to rewrite older minutes, but residents who attended those meetings quickly called out the discrepancies. In the meantime, Elias continued gathering community support. He organized a small meeting at a neighbor's house, where residents discussed their experiences with the HOA's increasingly erratic behavior. Many were shocked by how severe and personal the board's retaliation had become. One homeowner shared how Harlan had denied her request for a minor fence repair, simply because she questioned a board fee months earlier. Another revealed he had been threatened with fines for leaving his car in his driveway for too long. It became apparent the problem was systemic, not isolated. The investigation intensified. The state regulators interviewed homeowners, reviewed Elias' evidence, and compared it with the board's claims. The discrepancies were glaring. Meanwhile, the HOA attempted to intimidate Elias further. They sent yet another violation letter claiming his porch light was too bright. But by this point, their tactics were so transparent that even previously silent homeowners began speaking out. They rallied behind Elias, signing statements supporting his complaint and submitting their own reports of unfair treatment. Then, a major breakthrough occurred. A former board secretary, who had quietly resigned months earlier, reached out to Elias anonymously. She provided him with internal emails showing the board had intentionally discussed targeting certain outspoken homeowners. Worse, the emails revealed Harlan's personal disdain for Elias, describing him as someone who needed to be kept in line to prevent future challenges to authority. Documents also confirmed the board was attempting to enforce new landscaping rules without a community-wide vote, something strictly prohibited by state HOA law. Armed with this evidence, Elias forwarded the emails to the state investigators. The reaction was immediate and severe. The regulators expanded the investigation, now examining possible misuse of power, harassment, and illegal enforcement of rules. The HOA board realized the situation was spiraling out of their control. But instead of backing down, Harlan made one last desperate move. He scheduled an emergency board meeting and proposed a motion to impose a lien on Elias' property for unpaid fines, even though the fines were still under legal dispute. But this time, the board's unity cracked. 2 members refused to support the motion, fearing serious legal consequences. For the first time since the conflict began, Harlan's tight grip on the board began to loosen. As pressure mounted, Harlan's behavior grew erratic. He sent emotionally charged emails to the community claiming Elias was destroying neighborhood harmony. He hinted the investigation would cost everyone money, attempting to shift blame onto Elias instead of the board's illegal actions. But most residents were no longer fooled. Many openly questioned why the HOA had pursued such a petty and unnecessary conflict in the first place. Meanwhile, the state investigators uncovered more troubling patterns. The HOA had issued disproportionately high numbers of violations to a handful of homeowners who had previously challenged board decisions. Some appeals had been lost, others ignored, and a few even altered to reflect different wording. It became clear this wasn't just negligence, this was intentional manipulation. With growing community support, Elias called for a special board election, a legal process allowing homeowners to remove problematic leadership. The moment he filed the petition, Harlan erupted in fury. He stormed into Elias' yard unannounced, shouting about traitors, rebels, and people who don't respect order. Elias calmly recorded the entire incident on his phone while neighbors gathered on their porches, witnessing Harlan's meltdown. Within hours, the video quietly circulated throughout the neighborhood. Residents were shocked, not just by Harlan's unprofessional behavior, but by the realization that this was the person who had been controlling their community for years. The petition received overwhelming support. Even homeowners who were previously indifferent signed eagerly, desperate to restore fairness and stability. On the day of the special election, the turnout was the highest in the HOA's history. Homeowners lined the sidewalk, holding ballots, chatting quietly, and exchanging stories of their own run-ins with Harlan's over-enforcement. Volunteers monitored the voting tables to ensure transparency, stark contrast to the secretive manner in which Harlan had run the board. When the votes were counted, the results were decisive. Harlan Pierce was removed as HOA president, and 2 other board members were also voted out. A new interim board was formed, consisting of residents who had long advocated for transparency and fairness. Elias, despite being nominated, declined an official position, preferring instead to serve on the Compliance Advisory Committee, where he could help rewrite outdated rules. With the new leadership in place, the HOA suspended all pending fines against Elias and formally apologized for the board's misconduct. The state investigators concluded their report, issuing penalties and mandating corrective measures. Harlan attempted to challenge the decision, but failed, lacking community support and legal standing. For the first time in months, peace returned to Brookhaven Ridge. Elias standing in his yard beneath the shade of his still growing maple trees felt the weight of an entire neighborhood finally lift. New HOA board wasted no time initiating reforms. Their first act was to issue an updated, transparent version of the landscaping guidelines created with full community input, reasonable expectations, and clear definitions. Instead of vague, subjective language like uniform look, the new rules defined approved plant types, height ranges, and maintenance expectations while still allowing homeowners the freedom to personalize their yards. Elias was asked to review the draft before it was finalized. As he flipped through the pages, he was struck by how fair and sensible everything looked. "This," he said, "is how an HOA should operate." Residents were invited to attend open discussions where they could voice concerns or request changes. The board even participated in volunteer days where they helped elderly residents maintain their yards, rather than issuing automatic violations. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. People who once avoided HOA meetings now attended regularly. The atmosphere shifted from fear-based governance to collaborative community building. But the wounds left by the previous board ran deep. Many residents still felt anxious when checking their mailboxes, half expecting another arbitrary citation. Some expressed guilt over not speaking out sooner. Elias reassured them all. You weren't silent, he told them. You were surviving. Now we speak for those who couldn't. His words resonated, reminding the neighborhood that change was only possible because people finally united. Meanwhile, the former board members faded from community life. Harlan, unable to accept the fallout, moved away quietly after his attempts to regain influence failed. A small number of supporters tried to stir controversy, but their efforts quickly died out as residents recognized misinformation tactics similar to Harlan's old behavior. In time, the trees Elias planted grew taller, casting soft shadows across his yard. They had become a symbol in the neighborhood, a subtle reminder that even the smallest choices can spark powerful change. Children played beneath their branches during summer, neighbors paused to admire them during evening walks, and families often asked Elias for gardening recommendations. One day, at a community event hosted at the clubhouse, a neighbor approached Elias and said, "Your trees. They saved this neighborhood." Elias laughed, but he understood the sentiment. The conflict had been painful, exhausting, and at times overwhelming. Yet it had also exposed corruption, strengthened community bonds, and restored fairness. The neighborhood had grown not just visually, but spiritually. As the event ended and the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Elias sat on a bench overlooking the community he helped transform. He felt something he hadn't felt in months: peace. Months passed, and the transformation within Brookhaven Ridge became undeniable. The community newsletters were now friendly and informative instead of threatening. Meetings were live-streamed for transparency. Homeowners formed committees to improve neighborhood life gardening groups, neighborhood watch programs, even a small community choir. The rivalry and fear that once defined the HOA were replaced with cooperation and optimism. Elias continued caring for his yard, adding a few more flower beds and a small herb garden near the back porch. Every time he worked outside, neighbors stopped by to chat, ask for advice, or simply express gratitude for standing up when nobody else felt brave enough. Although he never sought recognition, Elias understood that the neighborhood viewed him as a quiet hero. One morning, he received a letter from the HOA, this time handwritten, friendly, and accompanied by a small gift card. It thanked him for his contribution to the community and invited him to join an upcoming workshop on community harmony and fair governance. Elias smiled at the gesture, appreciating how drastically things had changed. The state regulators eventually closed the case officially, declaring Brookhaven Ridge compliant with all corrective measures. The final report praised the community for stepping up, acknowledging that the homeowners' unity was the reason the board was able to recover from such severe misconduct. The regulators even used Brookhaven Ridge as a case study for how communities can overcome abusive HOA leadership. Looking back, Elias realized the conflict had shaped him as much as it shaped the neighborhood. He had learned how a simple act planting trees could escalate into a battle for fairness. Yet he had also discovered the power of persistence, community, and truth. His yard, once empty and plain, now stood as living proof that beauty and integrity could thrive even in the face of oppression. One evening, as he watered his garden, a child from across the street ran up to him and said, "Mr. Ward, your trees make our street the prettiest one in the neighborhood." Elias laughed and thanked him. As the child ran off, Elias looked at the maple trees swaying gently in the breeze. These trees had sparked fear, anger, and conflict, but now they represented renewal. This was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a community, a real one. And Elias had helped make it that way. As the sun set and cast warm golden light over the leaves, Elias whispered quietly to himself, "Worth it."